Comité pour la transition.
Gabon's coup is the 8th in West and Central Africa in 3 years. Widespread condemnation or military intervention have done little to unseat coup leaders in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Niger and Chad since 2020. Sanctions imposed on some of these countries have hit ordinary citizens the hardest. There were scenes of jubilation in Gabon as the Bongo's iron-fisted rule came to an end.
In the view of the above, General Oligui Nguema has ordered the reconnection of the fiber optical cable and the restoration of international radio and TV signal on the virus broadcasting packages available in Gabon.
Brice Oligui Nguema, the head of the Republican Guard, has been named as president of transitional government. The coup happened just after Bongo was declared the winner of presidential election. There had been concerns about lack of transparency in that vote. Bongo has pleaded with the world to help him.
People here have arrested me and my family. My son is somewhere, my wife is in another place, and I'm at the residence. Right now, I'm in the residence and nothing happening. Nothing is happening. I don't know what's going on. So I'm calling you to make the noise, really. I'm thanking you. Thank you.
The unconstitutional change of government in Libreville has been denounced by the international community.
Secretary General is following closely the evolving situation in Gabon. He notes with deep concern the announcement of the election results amid reports of serious infringements of fundamental freedoms. He firmly condemns the ongoing coup attempt as a means to resolve the post-electoral crisis. The Secretary General reaffirms his strong opposition to military coups. The Secretary General calls on all actors involved to exercise restraint, engage in an inclusive and meaningful dialogue, and ensure that the rule of law and human rights are fully respected.
The African Union Peace and Security Council is expected to discuss the political standoff in Gabon. Kylie Kumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, let's discuss more with Dr. Fonteh Akum, who is the Executive Director at the Institute for Security Studies. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. It is interesting that General Brice Oligui Nguema has been named the transitional leader. He was once the bodyguard, we understand, of Bongo's late father, who was the previous ruler or leader of Gabon. How do you see the power dynamics, or how do you interpret the power dynamics here, Dr. Akum?
Well, I mean, it's a power dynamic which has been inscribed within the history itself of the country, given that Ali Bongo took over from his father, and the Bongo family has in fact governed Gabon over the past 56 years. It's worth noting that in 2018, President Ali Bongo also suffered a stroke. Despite that medical condition, he basically stood for the recent elections, which he claimed to have won, in fact, when he was proclaimed victor. And so the coup came in ostensibly to scrap the elections which were contested, but which basically do not necessarily signal a shift in Gabon towards a more democratic dispensation.
We'll circle back to Gabon itself if there is time, Dr. Akum. But if we look at the region, we look at the Sahel, for example, all the way from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, it seems to be a coup contagion. Now, granted, the reasons might be different in each of those countries, but are there trends that you're detecting in what we're seeing and the frequency with which these are happening?
Yes, indeed. There are a number of trends we are detecting, starting from Mali, where the August 2020 coup ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Some of the dynamics that we are seeing underlying these coups are, one, a history of coups in the countries where they have taken place. In Mali, we had coups in the past. In Guinea, we had coups as well in the past. So did we in Burkina Faso and Niger. And of course, in Chad, slightly different scenario where Kaka Debi basically succeeded his father, who was killed in combat. In Sudan, it was actually a different situation as well. So there are different kind of coups, but underlying these coups, we can underline one, the gap in governance expectations, that is the demand for representative, accountable and legitimate governance by the people and the supply of that kind of governance model by the political elite. The second challenge that we see is actually one of transitions from the previous coups. Most of the other presidents were ousted in the Sahel from Burkina Faso through Mali and now to Niger, were actually heads of state who had come to power following coups themselves. And here, in the case of Niger, you had President Bazoum, who succeeded Issoufou, who himself had come to power after a coup. So there's some of those dynamics. But to speak of course, there's an interpretation that points to contagion at the moment. But we would have to see exactly, given that every single coup has basically been context-specific as well.
And that is an interesting point to make. It's not like you can replicate, the catalytic reasons for why they're happening. There is a very important history that you've just pointed out to us tonight, which shows the differentiation. But as we close, and in a very limited amount of time, Dr. Akum, why are these happening in predominantly former French colonies?
Well, I mean, there's a current geopolitical context as well, within which there is a perception that a lot of the political elite have been so far operating within a neo-colonial model. And there is a push towards a decolonization of governance in these former French colonies. However, the underlying currents that we are reading actually point to a deficit in representative, accountable, and legitimate governance within these countries, regardless of who the patrons are to the political class.
Thank you so much for your time and your analysis tonight. We appreciate it. That was Dr. Fonteh Akum, Executive Director at the Institute for Security Studies.